Could you explain who you are first?
Yep. Good evening, my name is Iain. I'm the current DUSA president. I'm running for re-election. Prior to holding the office of president, I was a history and politics student here in the university, and I graduated last June.
I'm Paul Hosking. I'm running for DUSA president, and I'm a fourth year history student.
Okay. So you both kind of come from vaguely the same background?
Yeah, humanities background, which is.
Okay. Paul, you decided to run the day before the polls closed. Why was that?
Well, I had been thinking about doing it before, but it wasn't until right at the very last I thought, I'll just go for it. I've got nothing else to lose, so that's why I thought I would just go for it.
But why? What were your reasons?
Well, why? Simply because I think that, especially in terms of representation at the university, there's a lot that can be done to improve it here, as well as the communication and the collaboration amongst the university.
Why did you leave it so late? Was there doubt in your mind that you would represent
I was actually quite busy, really. Just the real answer, I was busy. I didn't get a chance.
You have experience of being a student rep.
Yeah.
You both have mentioned this on you would like to improve communication between student representatives. How would you both tackle that problem?
Well, I think from sort of my perspective, obviously being president this year and leading the executive, I think it needs to start at the top and filter its way down. So I think there's an awful lot more that the executive should be doing to communicate with students. A lot of it actually has to be communicating what we're doing, because it's not as if the executive this year or in previous years have been sitting back. They have been taking initiatives, but it's almost about communicating that to students, letting them know what we're doing. That way they can become more familiar with the exec, and then out of that, the other representation structures we have. Because the representation structure we have here in Dundee University is excellent, and it's become that way over a number of years of hard work and initiatives. So much so that we actually have other universities copying our structure. So that shows that it's widely respected. Last year we helped advise St Andrews in setting up a school president system such as our own. And we're also talking with other universities about class reps.
Okay. Did you find that there was a lot of communication between the exec and the representatives? Or?
Certainly, I think that the executive does its job well, and I think that even the SRC, it does do its job. I would just say that it doesn't get down to the grassroots of who it's meant to be talking to. Certainly, if I were elected, I think that the best way of improving the representation system is by starting on each individual module, in terms of, if you like, introducing not so much as like class reps, but tutorial reps, as it were, so that you can really get in amongst where the proper students and make it much more informal on a basis like that.
Do you think there is time and structure available to do that? Or?
Well, I'd have doubts in my mind about adding another layer of representation, simply from the point of view that what we have at the minute, I was very clear on this in discussions I've had this year, that instead of tinkering with the system every year, we need to bed it in and make what we have work. Now, I think it's excellent, but that doesn't mean it's perfect. There's things we could be doing to fix it, and certainly the class reps and how they relate to their school presidents, who then sit in the SRC, and that's the interface then between individual school reps and the executive quite often. Yes, there's more we could be doing at the bottom, but it's more about bedding in the system, because constant change stops progress being happening.
Do you not think it's important to have a fresh voice coming through from the students themselves rather than people who've been...
New ideas are always welcomed, but I also think there's an awful lot to be said from having that experience to identify the problems and see what needs fixed. And I certainly think that if we can try and over next year, as President, what I would like to see is the SRC empowered more to bring more ideas to the table, rather than it always being the 7-member executive who almost have to come up with the ideas and then pass that idea on, do you like, do you not, rather than have a wider circulation of idea generation. To empowerment, well, first of all, this year we've got the new non-sabbatical role of Vice President Engagement. Now that's essentially come by as a result of wanting to empower the SRC to come up with their own ideas, run their own campaigns separate from the DUSA executive, because I think by doing that you're going to increase awareness of the SRC, which feeds into increasing the awareness of the representation structure overall. That's one key role. Second thing is we need to make sure that we get committed people standing for the SRC elections next September. This year we've had a good SRC, but by no means good enough. I think there's more we could be doing, more we can be pushing forward.
Had much touch with the SRC?
Well, the reason why I'm focusing so much on representation is because I don't think that the SRC really does get back to the actual the modules within the school. Certainly, I've been a class rep for 4 years, and only in 1 year did the humanities president actually get back to me or even talk to me at all. Which is why I think that there is room for structure for to be able to add in a couple of extra layers of representation, simply because if it's not working, if it's not doing what it's meant to be doing, then it needs change.
The problem is the structure is working, and perhaps in some areas it's the personalities that is causing the problem, the breakdown in communication. Because there are schools where there's no such problems between class reps, the president bringing issues to SRC, probably the School of Engineering.
Have you in humanities before? Like, haven't there? That's one of the ones that there's a lot of cuts going through humanities.
Yeah, I think in terms of the wider university picture, humanities is something that needs looked at. We need more investment in. It's something that recently I've been working on with the rector to secure that, because the rector feels very passionate about the role of humanities in the university. But in my experience, before I was president, I was chair of the SRC in 2010-11. So I've seen that there are excellent schools, and then there's schools that perhaps more effort's required in, but that's not the fault of the system, it's perhaps the people who are running. So it's the job next year of the president, the deputy president, to get the best candidates, to be not recruiting them, but encouraging as many people as possible to stand, because the more you have to work for something, the more you're going to come up with ideas, the more you're going to be putting into it, the more passion you're going to have for it.
Do you agree with what he's saying, or do you?
I do agree to an extent. I think that obviously humanities is one example, and it's not always going to be the perfect example. I'm sure maybe medicine may be completely different, but in saying that, I still think that it may work in some other places, but I still think there's actually more room for improvement. And I think that even adding, certainly I think the tutorial reps would help in getting to the students, but also I think that having an actual discipline rep, an official discipline rep, to be in constant liaison with the SRC, I think that would make the entire thing much more organised and much more influential.
You were talking about your relationship with the rector. Have you had much? Did you go and see Brian when he was here?
I went to see him once. So
How did that go?
Oh well, I haven't actually personally met him, but I did go to see him. It was just interesting. It was quite interesting. I think he said something on humanities. I don't really remember exactly what it was, but I think he criticised humanities.
So you didn't try to go and see him when he was here recently?
I never heard that he was here recently.
Okay. What's your relationship like with the rector?
The relationship with rector Brian's absolutely fantastic. He's a brilliant rector. He's been over in Dundee 4 times during my term as president so far, and we would have weekly or bi-weekly Skype sessions, because he's got a lot of filming commitments, but that doesn't sort of take away from how important or influential his role is. For instance, he was here in November where he did a Q&A session. We had about 350 students at that. It's a very important time. There's lots of things going on in higher and further education. And the point he was making at Humanities wasn't so much to criticise it, he was criticising the university for, first of all, not funding it enough, but also almost not taking enough interest and taking due regard of humanities. So for instance, not keeping on top of the fact that some modules only have perhaps 3 hours of contact time every week between lecturer and student. Obviously you need a hell of a lot more than that, split between lectures and tutorials. Because very much I think, my experience whenever I was studying history and politics is it's in tutorials, it's in seminars where you really get to grasp the subject. You learn how to debate and challenge ideas. I'm sure Paul's saying that it's a great breeding ground for that sort of thing, but we need more of it.
So your relationship with Brian is quite well established?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
He was saying that it's a 2-year presidential might be better in terms of building on things. Do you disagree? Or?
I think just in general, I'm coming very much from that point of view, because I think the job of president encompasses an awful lot. You're more than just a figurehead here in DUSA. You're responsible for DUSA, you're responsible for its relationship with students, you're responsible for it operating as a commercial entity, but you're also the lead representative of Dundee students to the university management, to the government, to council. So there's an awful lot to do, there's an awful lot to learn in those first few months. And then if you really want to start tackling big issues, you need more time than the 7 or 8 months I've had. Brian feels similarly that in his position as rector, it's taken him 18 months to get to grips with everything he needs to get to grips with. So similarly, sort of on a smaller scale, I feel exactly the same. I've had a lot of successes, I feel, and so has the executive, but there's more to be done, and to do that, we need sort of to keep that continuity going.
Would you be wanting to?
I would say that certainly it is a positive thing, but at the same time, I think there's always room for new ideas, and new ideas is always going to be good for the organisation.
I'd agree that new ideas is essential, but I also think coming up with new ideas based on the experience and the problems that the executive and I have faced this year is just as valuable, if not more so, than new ideas coming from completely outside, because then you're faced with exactly the same problem of 3 to 4 months lost at the start of a term, getting to grips with the job, getting to grips with the various different demands, depending on what you're doing. Are you sitting in university court? Are you at Senate? Are you in the Board of Trustees here in DUSA? Whereas I would have that next year, I can get,
Is that maybe not a problem with, is that something that outgoing president should be providing for incoming?
Yeah, when we provide an excellent handover.
Or does it take 3 to 4 months?
Because you can only, during our handover, it's essentially work shadowing. We can, as you know, on one-to-one sessions during the handover, you can have certain bits of information passed on to you and so on. But until you're sat in the room and you're at the big committee table and you're the voice of the students, it puts a very different spin on things into what sort of, one-on-one I could say or be told in a small meeting. But when you're sitting in university courts and you're making big decisions and you're trying to persuade, businessmen with years, decades of experience in some cases, that your argument and the argument you're making for students is the right one.
Do you have any experience of doing that sort of thing, liaising with the government or business?
Well, not really, no. I mean, I have worked within the SRC partly, but in terms of experience with actual governmental or business institutions, no, not really that much.
Did you have any before you started?
Well, I was chair of SRC for the year before. I was the first ever independently elected chair, so I had to run as chairperson. So through that, I managed to chair meetings where we had the University Secretary, Jim McGeorge, in to discuss the strategic review and the voluntary severance. I also chaired a meeting where we had the principal, Pete Downs, came along to that. So I had some experience of dealing with these people. But certainly over the last year, as you can appreciate, with the number of meetings the President has every week, I've built up a good working relationship with them, and we know where each other's coming from.
There's a perception on campus that the exec is irrelevant. How would you tackle that?
I would disagree completely. I think the SRC has got a very vital role within the university, and to say that it would be irrelevant would just be a naive and uninformed perception of the organisation.
So why would that be naive and uninformed?
Well, just because of the work that it does, to say that it's irrelevant, it's not looking at what it does within each school, what it does within the executive as well. It's quite an important institution.
Can you give any examples?
Well, obviously it runs obviously a lot of the schools. It helps sort of pass a lot of the representation issues and just sorts out everything in a more local level within the university.
Yeah, I would agree with Paul that the idea that it's irrelevant is completely wrong. To take the executive, for instance, and my own role as president, in August I had a meeting with the Scottish Education Minister, Mike Russell, to talk about fees, to set out why DUSA was opposed to them, why I was personally opposed to them, not just because I was from Northern Ireland and had I been going to university now as a student, I'd be one having to pay up to £9,000, but the fact that the entire principle of charging fees at such a huge increase, fees in general, but such a huge increase is what he was allowing, completely flies in the face of the concept of the traditional historical concept of Scottish higher education being based on the ability, not the ability to pay. From that small example demonstrates that the exec is not irrelevant. The fact that when there's issues relating to budget cuts in recent years. There hasn't been very many this year, but in recent years it's been the executive and the SRC standing together to oppose that, to make sure that when there were cuts it affected students in the most minimalistic way possible. Third example this year would be the merger between Abertay and ourselves, which the government tried to force on us, and they tried to use financial considerations from the SFC, as well as the fact that Abertay were lacking a principal because they thought they saw an opportunity. Through my executive working with Abertay, we managed to blow it out of the water within a few weeks, because we managed to mobilise the support of our principals, our courts, and the local population here in Dundee, who were completely opposed to the idea of a merged university. So, you know, those three very real examples. But this goes back to one of my campaign points of better communication. We need to make that point to our students and our staff, saying that this executive is not irrelevant, future executives, the union is not irrelevant. We're not just a place where we do, you know, cheap food and cheap drink. We offer so much more, and we stand up every day for students.
How would you, sorry, do you want to?
Well, I would just completely agree. I think that the union and the SRC and the exec is very relevant, and I agree with Iain's point as well. The university and the union need to be going out of the way to communicate more with students. Is certainly one of my points as well, is that we do need more communication among the student body.
And how would that be facilitated? What exactly?
Well, for instance, like we've just finished here in DUSA an idea. It's been loosely termed a Hearts and Minds campaign, but essentially it is putting out there in very simple, using the same sort of publicity that we use for our commercial arm. For instance, we're the best union in Scotland 5 years in running. Is to start to develop the idea on campus among students that we're not, the reason we're the best union is not just because we're a good commercial venue, it's because we do everything else on top. So we're going to start doing that. That's going to be videos, it's going to be constant publicity. In terms of better communication next year, if I'm re-elected, I intend on a weekly email from the president going out to all students, because now we have an email system here in the university which works, unlike group-wise, that can actually be facilitated. And it won't be a very long email, it will just pick out the highlights of what DUSA and the exec and the SRC have been doing in the past week to show students, well actually, do you know what, perhaps I should stand for election in the future because these guys are making a difference.
What is your campaign going to be like? Are you planning on doing anything extravagant or interesting? Or?
Handing out tons of cupcakes.
Cupcakes, yeah. Cupcakes and sweets are always the favourite ones. In terms of me, don't really think extravagant perhaps, but lots of hard work. You know, I've got the experience of campaigning last year, so I've got a few ideas from last year I'd like to carry on. Others perhaps weren't so successful, so I'll rethink those.
What was some of the unsuccessful ones?
Not really unsuccessful, it's just the fact that I think you need to bring something new, because every year, you know, the campaigns are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, which, you know, speaking not as candidate, as president, it's great to see that more and more students are getting engaged. So like last year, you know, there's barbecues and bouncy castles. So then it's, what's the next step up this year? But I'm not going to say too much because I'd rather it be a surprise.
And lastly, Ron, you guys are also standing against the re-open nominations option.
Well, I beat Ron last year, so I'm confident I beat Ron again this year.
Only just though?
Well, I think I beat him by 300 odd votes last year, and that was a very determined, it was a very specific campaign last year, was the reason for Ron. I don't want to get into, you know, that's dredging up the past, whereas the whole thing about my campaign this year is, yes, I'm very proud of the work I've done this year, but I'm talking about what I want to be doing next year and what I want the union to be doing next year, so I'm not going to get bogged down in the Ron election issue last year, I think.
Well, how are you going to combat it this year?
Well, I think it's the simple fact that I'm up against a real human this time, and he's got his own policies, and we can have a debate like this, and we can carry that out on the campus during the 3 days of polling. And we can exchange ideas, whereas, you know, perhaps last year with the Ron campaign, it was all online, there was no chance for debate. Any sort of opposing comments to Ron were instantly deleted, things like that. So the fact that the Paul's up against me this year is a good opportunity for debate. It's giving students the chance again to see that the exec are relevant. The fact you've got people who are willing to put time and effort into trying to be elected to do the best job.
What about yourself?
In terms of Ron, well, I just want to see if I can get elected first, and then I'll face any particular challenges after that.